You know something, me and Gene? We've been working out and we're ready for this. We've been running on the beach, we've been pumping the weights. Matilda's been giving us good advice. We're ready, we're in better condition now than ever before. Me and Gene, we're going all the way to victory. Right, Matilda? What's that a big fan?
What?
Yeah.
What did she say? She agrees? She concurs?
Yes, she does.
Hello, fellow Turtleheads. My name is Tyler Elenick, and this is Some Kind of Wonderful with Travis Orndorff. Travis, how you doing, my friend?
What's up, dude? You know what? Old Ivan Putski and them Turtleheads, right?
That's right.
So we'll call it, can we do that? Like, I hope, okay, so we'll just get feedback after this. So if all of you listening, and again, I think we're in the double digits now. If you're okay being the Turtlehead fans and knowing that you're Mr. Wonderful's legacy, Ivan Putski's a Turtlehead. I know that for sure, right?
He's a shoot Turtlehead, but these guys would be honorary Turtleheads in the most complimentary way.
You know how a Turtlehead, when you got his poking his head out, dude, that's one of the. You can see my dad laughing, and you can see me and Gene just like dying. And that's the best thing about my dad's promos. Like when we post them on Instagram, the whole time I can see my dad is like on the brink of just destruction, completely laughing. And the video we posted of him at getting a manicure the other day, he's talking to the girls, and then even some of the stuff he says doesn't make any sense. Like, hey, I need you to buff him better because last time I saw a glare. Wait, yeah. That's the whole point of having a glare is because you buffed it, Glad. But nobody really. What's great is I don't either. People don't notice it, or they're like, "Nah, it's Paul Orndorff. I'll let him do it."
Yeah, they roll with it. Yeah. They get it. That's part of the character, man.
Yeah,
So good.
If I tell you a mosquito can pull a plow, hook him up.
That's right. Oh, that's so classic. That he was that. Then that little shoot interview, he could float between Paul Orndorff, the man, and Mr. Wonderful, the character, effortlessly within the same sentence. It was so genius.
Yeah, what's funny is I think he was always on the brink of Mr. Wonderful at all times. I think somebody had asked me, about Dad getting a title, and I don't think you at that time, and I'm very similar. We just have an intensity mode that when we turn it on, it's hard to turn off. And I know that I have to be reeled in, right? I don't know that you could reel my dad in back then. I don't know that you could let him loose like that. I think if you give him the title back then, you don't know what happens. At least, as Vince is building this, infrastructure, Dad was a hothead, right? So you got to be careful. And he was also, Dad was, I think I saw today, Bret Hart's like 61 or something like that. Yeah, my dad passed away at 72. So my dad was a decade older than most of the wrestlers at that time that were up and coming. So that's why the most of them is the 90s, because in the mid 80s they were just coming up.
From your childhood, what was your memories of the British Bulldogs?
Yeah, okay. So I remember the British Bulldogs as the tag team champions. Like to me, they were the tag team. Like again, this is partially when I'm born. I'm telling you I'm sitting on my front lawn yelling at kids, right?
Yeah, I'm with you, brother. That's right.
But yeah, like the British Bulldogs was the tag team of the 80s. You could get into and talk about the Road Warriors. They were a little bit later, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm not taking away from them. You can go down to the South, and you had the Rock and Roll Express, and you had some of the other ones, and you had the Killer Bees in the 80s. There was nothing more synonymous to me as a tag team than the British Bulldogs until the Road Warriors. They had some iconic matches. They had iconic wrestling gear, mm-hmm. just gorgeous. I mean, like I always thought they just nailed it. And they reflected it too, right? So they were actually British. So, they were, it always surprised me that they weren't more famous independently, but that's how they built their brand. So even when Davey Boy came, went into singles matches, I could be wrong. I don't know the tapes, and I don't know the the seating and whatnot. But I think that they were probably at their best together. Not to take anything away from, because Davey Boy was a phenomenal wrestler, phenomenal showman, and had some amazing matches as an individual. But for me, it's just what I grew up on. The first thing I saw was them together, and I can't get that in my head. So I always just think of them as like, I would have assumed they were related.
I mean, the chemistry was unreal, and what made them so special, in my opinion, was the contrast in styles. I mean, Davey Boy was a powerhouse, and Dynamite Kid, powerful but quick and agile.
Yeah, he was intense in the ring, man. He would move. Yeah, Davey had that strength, but Dynamite, man, he could go. Like he had a motor, man. Davey was more like my dad. He with the size, and he was very athletic. I mean, had a great body. He checked all the marks for sure. Both of them did. They were just different, but the contrasting styles together were such a good fit, especially for the time.
Excellent. Well, how do you want to kind of set up the interview with Bronwyne? Did you want to do a little intro for the people and kind of talk about how you guys connected and what they can kind of expect in the next hour?
There's been this little I don't know, like family reunion, if you will, on Instagram, where the kids of wrestlers have connected. And, I'll talk to one and they're like, oh, I just talked to Bronny, or I just talked to Georgia, or I was talking to Lacey the other day, and she's like, oh, I talked to Georgia a couple weeks ago. Yeah. she just started Big Boss Man. Is it Big Boss Man WWE?
Yeah, that's the handle. Yeah. On Instagram.
Yeah. So, so there's this little community of us who, she's done several podcasts, Bronny has, but, I think it's just from a different perspective. She seemed to enjoy it, and everybody that sits down and talks, they're just different questions. They make you think a little bit harder. But I think you'll see in the podcast, she was a little apprehensive at first, as most people are. And then, once there's a safe zone to share, hopefully, people get to that point. But, she was very transparent, as she was on, I think, in every other thing she's done, but just this may be a little more close to home.
Well said, sir. So without further ado, here's Travis Orndorff and Bronwyne Billington.
So it's been a long time, ladies and gentlemen, all 7 or 8 of you, I think, that are following us. That's funny with me. Stop, Tyler. Stop laughing. That's not funny yet. We are on and live with Bronny Billington. And so her father, the Dynamite Kid, one half of the one of the greatest tag teams in the history of wrestling, the British Bulldogs. So, Bronny, welcome to the podcast. Some Kind of Wonderful. How are you today?
I'm pretty well. Thanks for having me. So I'm sorry it took so long to get on here, but life's been a little hectic with COVID and getting back to normal here.
How is life? How is everything? I know you have a beautiful child at home, and if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, you were engaged to be married?
Yes, I'll be getting married this New Year's Eve. Looks like it should be happening. I think life's, like I said, heading back to normal. Yeah, we have 2 daughters, so a 13-year-old and a 3-year-old. And things are picking back up. Wrestling shows are happening in Calgary, and, everyone's working consistently, and restaurants are open again. They were closed for quite a long time, so things are picking back up.
So, Bronny, I appreciate you coming on again. And so those that don't know you, if you could just give them a quick background, and obviously I mentioned a little bit of it, but just tell a little bit about your story.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Calgary. My dad is the Dynamite Kid, so he moved from England to Calgary to train with the Hart family at the Hart Dungeon at a young age. And my Aunt Julie Hart, my mom's sister, started dating Bret Hart. And then my mom met my dad, and she started dating my dad behind their back because Bret was like, Michelle's my little sister, like no one can date her type of thing. So Dynamite Kid, here comes Dynamite Kid, a charming British lad, and my mom just fell in love with him, and they started sneaking around dating. And so I grew up really close with all the Hart family. I'm only blood related to Bret's kids because of the relation with my mom's sister, of course. But I was right in there with all the Hart cousins growing up. And so there was never like, oh, you're not a blood cousin. It wasn't like that. I was right in there with all of them growing up. And that's just how we grew up.
Well, and it's funny you say that because so when I think about my childhood, there wasn't really anybody that could understand what it was like to have a dad that was a wrestler. And people have asked me all the time what it's like, and there's no answer to that. I don't know what it's like because I don't know what it's different than.
Exactly.
This is just what I grew up with, right? But E.T. or T.E. and I have talked about it a couple times, and the Iron Sheik lived like 5 miles away from us. So even though my dad and Sheik didn't have a real relationship, the wives did.
Yeah.
And so I've always talked about how the closest relationships of wrestling were the wives, not the wrestlers.
Right. All the kids would hang out and grow up together, and the dads would be on the road, right? So yeah, we did that too.
And they were on the road so much. But yeah, the Sheik's daughters and I, we kind of grew up together. I can remember spending the night over the house and vice versa when we were really young. So, do you have a different perspective on wrestling based on the fact that you had relationships around you that kind of, I don't know, maybe shelters you from the life on the road, because, I felt isolated when my dad was gone for a long time because he didn't really have any relationships with anybody. So when he came home, it was just him, which was great.
Yeah.
But during that end time, did y'all spend a lot of time together as you were, as they were out on the road and doing whatever?
Yeah. So, my mom and Julie were really, really close. So when Julie my mom and Julie are from Regina, actually. So I'm not sure if you knew that, but when Julie first left Regina to Calgary, my mom was only 16 and she followed Julie, to Calgary. And so when they started dating wrestlers and then marrying wrestlers eventually, and they were on the road, us kids spent our time together like siblings. So Brett's kids and my family, we did, Sunday dinners together and Christmases together and all that kind of stuff, like camping and road trips. And we did everything like brothers and sisters. So we have a really special, close bond. And yeah, like you mentioned, having sleepovers at other wrestlers' children's houses. I did that as well with Bad News Allen's family. Like his wife would babysit us and we'd just be over there hanging out with the other kids. His son was about my age. He had daughters that were older. We hung out with them as well, but his son was my age. So yeah, we'd just sleep over there. And his wife, Helen, was amazing.
Now, there was a very defining moment in my life where I knew my dad was Mr. Wonderful and not just dad, right? And believe it or not, I remember I was a little kid and my mom got pulled over for a speeding ticket. And so we're sitting on the side of the road waiting for the police officer. I'm a young kid, and the police officer comes up and goes, "Oh, Mrs. Orndorff, I'm so sorry for pulling you over.
Right.
I'm going to let you go today." And this is a true story. I'm sitting in the car and I started crying. And my mom was like, "Why are you crying?" I'm like, "Because you should have got a ticket. Why do people treat us differently?"
Yeah.
And that was, for me, I just thought it wasn't fair that we had some kind of advantage. And even so, I started this new role with my job. And so I go up and I give him my ID and the guy sees it and he's like, "Orndorff, are you?" So, being the last name Billington, did you escape a lot of and correct me if I'm wrong, you would have to bring up who your father was in order for people to really connect the dots. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't think anyone ever just heard my last name and got it. But, and it took me a long time to, kind of like that moment that you're talking about that you realize like, oh, my dad's like a big deal or whatever. I think for me, it was like once the internet started getting big and people would be like Googling things and sending it to me you could just look up my name and this would pull up. So it took the internet for me to really realize like how big my dad was. So I was probably, and then in my 20s going to wrestling shows and people would just be like, "Your dad's the Dynamite Kid," and just praising him and telling me stories. But I can remember a particular story. I went to like a nightclub with a fake ID. I actually had my cousin Jade Hart's ID. So I was 17. You have to be 18 in Calgary to go to the bar. So I was like, "Yeah, here's my ID. I'm Jade Hart." And then he looks at me. He's like, "You're not Jade Hart." He's like, "I know Jade Hart." And I was like, "Oh, well," I'm like, "Well, my dad's the Dynamite Kid." And he's like, "Oh, that's awesome." He's like, "Come on in." So that was probably one of my first moments. I was like, damn, I'm a big deal. I can get away with stuff.
It's always local stuff, right? So I used to bartend in downtown Atlanta, and I can remember going in and, this is in the late 90s when my dad was doing the the power plant. And again, our last name, he kept his full name his entire life. So, and there's unfortunately not enough Orndorffs out there for me to avoid any conversation. But I can remember going up and showing my ID, and like, this is no joke. I remember one time I was at a bar and I show my ID, and the guy's like, "Oh, I trained with your dad at the power plant." And so like I ended up with the bartender, the manager, going into the back room, and like the chained up rope, velvet robes and ropes and whatever. And then I remember the other time was when I was 19. I went to LA, and I wanted to be an actor. So I got to LA, and I'm at a bar with one of these the guy that was hosting me at the time, and Matt Sorum from Guns N' Roses come up from behind me, and he was the drummer, and comes up and grabs me underneath the arms. He's like, "I haven't seen you in years," and I'm like, "I've never seen you in my life other than on the what the hell are we talking about?"
Yeah.
And but I had met him years before going out with my dad to Los Angeles. So, did you have the opportunity? I know you were so young. I hope to be empathetic and sensitive to the subject. Obviously, with I've never watched The Dark Side of the Ring. I refuse to. It's too upsetting to me because I do know some of these stories and characters. Yeah. So what was it like for you those first few years? And correct me if I'm wrong. You had a disconnect with your dad at some point, kind of younger in your childhood, correct?
So he was always on the road, so he was never home very often, and often wrestling in Japan. I think it was like 6 weeks on, and then they'd be home for like a week or two, juggling like Stampede Wrestling as well. So I never had a lot of solid time with him. But whenever he was home, he was always really sweet to me. Like, he never was the one that would discipline me. That would be my mom. Like, he was such a softie towards me, and he'd usually be resting up his body, training at the Hart House. So I don't have a lot of memories, but a few glimpses.
Now, did you ever end up in the gym with him? Did he ever take you to the gym with you?
No, not really. We had a wrestling ring in our backyard. So we lived on an acreage. We had a big barn in the backyard, and there was a ring in there. So I can remember him wrestling around, like training some of his friends. And then us kids would get in there. I don't really remember us being in there with him, but we would just get in there and play.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, I'd be like, I'm Miss Elizabeth. And I remember Dallas would be like, I'm Macho Man. And Jade was probably Sherry because she loved Sherry.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. Yeah, I can remember. I remember the first time I got in a wrestling ring, which was crazy. I think I was like 18 or 19. My dad was. I remember the first time. I don't remember how old it was. Might have been 16, but I remember we went to a nonprofit event, and he wrestled like the local wrestling coach, and in front of the kids and stuff. And
right.
So then I was his turn. So I got in the ring, and like I'm wrestling him. He's just sitting there. Believe it or not, he was pulling my hair. And he's like dragging me around and whatnot. And then, so the rest of the referee comes over and distracts him. And then I got on all fours and stood behind him. And then the referee pushed him, and he fell over my back. And of course I pinned him. So, that was probably one of my funner moments, getting to pin my dad in front of, like 400 kids. And then a microphone comes in my face, and I'm like, I don't even remember that they called me Kelly or something. And I'm like, as soon as they told me this made up name, I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to say now. I got so confused. So
yeah,
being in the ring was always one of those things that I felt at home there. Like I somehow had this connection, and so I still enjoy it now. After everything was said and done, did you ever consider? Because everybody asks me this question, and I'm always curious from other people. Did you ever consider going into wrestling?
I did. So it was around high school. I was hanging out with my cousin, Ted Hart, and he had a wrestling school for kids, and it was called Mat Rats. So all my cousins were involved, like a lot of people, Ted, Harry, TJ, a bunch of younger kids like around the community. And then he got all the girls, like all the girl cousins involved. They were like managers. And then I'm sure Natty got involved. She must have got involved around that time. And so I was hanging out with Ted, and he's really, if you know Ted, he's really good at like convincing you, you should do this. He's like, oh my God, people are going to love it. Like, you're Dynamite Kid's daughter. Like, we need this to happen. One of his kids needs to wrestle, and you're a female. So like, this is going to be so cool. And so I was like, yeah, I'm going to do this. So I started working out, not like getting real jacked or anything, but just like more toned. And I never did make it into the ring. I had mailed my dad letters at that time. Like that's when you would mail letters instead of phoning. So I told him like, yeah, I was interested in getting involved in wrestling. And I think in my mind, I just thought that would bring my dad back or like help me connect to him. And I was like, oh, he's going to move back. Like he's going to train me. Like this is that in my mind, that's how it was playing out. It was going to be a dream come true. And my mom and dad would get back together. And so I mailed him this letter and he never replied to it. And so finally I picked up the phone and asked him, like, did you get my letter? And he's like, yeah. And then, but there was more to it than just that. I was also questioning, like, why did you move away? How could you abandon me and my brother and sister? Stuff like that. So when I asked him, why didn't you write me back? He's like, I didn't like what the letter said. And he just hung up. That's when our falling out for 15 years happened. So then I, of course, was discouraged and didn't want to get involved. But I don't know if I ever really wanted to. I think I was just like a pipe dream of, this is going to make my dad interested in me and move back. Yeah,
I think we all romanticize in a way. How do we connect with our fathers, especially ones, just from like my connection with other human beings is so much different than it is with a celebrity. And I don't know how to explain it to people, but when you have that name recognition, it does change your perspective on how you're viewed by the world. So now, obviously I've gone through, a couple of your stories and a little bit, but now however, because my dad and I had two huge fights in my life. So there was really only one time that we went like 6 months without speaking. So, how old were you when your dad moved?
I was 7 when he moved back to England.
So you were 7. What was the relationship like from then until the time you reached out to talk to him about wrestling?
So I was 7 when he left, and then I started acting out in school about 3 years later. I was getting in trouble at school, and so my mom went to my Uncle Brett, and she was crying. She's like, she's acting out in school, like she needs to see her dad. So my Uncle Brett actually used like his frequent flyers or whatever, and sent my brother and I over to England for the summer, which back then, so I was 10, my brother was 7, and we flew there by ourselves. Back then you could do that. I don't think you can do that now. All the way to England. We had a stopover in Toronto for like at least an hour or two. So there was just like people with us the whole time, and we were totally fine, cool, like not even nervous. So we went over there for the whole summer when I was 10 and had the best summer ever. Like I mentioned before he was just in and out, not a lot of quality time. So that summer is the most time I've ever spent with him in my whole life. And I have nothing but positive memories. We had a great summer. It was like, he had a really lovely girlfriend at the time. Her name was Joanne, and she was so good to us. She took me shopping and made sure we were well fed, and we were doing like child activities. And yeah, it was great. So then that's the only time I had seen him before reconnecting with him in my 20s. But we talked every weekend. My mom would make sure we'd call every Sunday. So I think it was like free or half price to call on Sundays or something. So my mom would be the one to call. She'd get on the phone first and then, pass it to us kids. So she did talk to my dad. Like she was the one that maintained that relationship for us and passed around the phone. He had never met my younger sister because when he left, my mom was pregnant, but she would talk to him too. And so they had a relationship over the phone.
Now, obviously, anytime that a father's, not around, it doesn't matter the reason, it has such a huge impact. So, first of all, I'm sorry to hear that. I know that, I had my own personal issues with my home life. Most of it was surrounded around my own brother versus my father. But, the trauma doesn't go away in spite of the fame. Yeah. In fact, I think the fame sometimes makes it worse.
Yeah, it took a long time, but I feel like I finally come to terms with things and I'm okay with it. And I wouldn't be who I am without all these.
Absolutely not. And it's a great opportunity for all of us, I think, to try to help others because we were, I think we were directly in front and center to the mental health and the toll that business takes on your life, because it's not a full-time job. It's a life, A job would be them coming home to be parents. The rest of it was just their life. So now your father passed, correct me if I'm wrong, 2018?
That's right.
Okay. And what was it like up until that time? Did I know you've made peace about it, but were you able to make peace with him prior to his passing? And did y'all have, any kind of, relationship at that point?
Yes. So we reconnected in 2010. It was around the time Facebook was getting big, and I reconnected with some cousins out in England. And so I was like, I was old enough now. I had got my first credit card, and I'm like, I had a 2-year-old daughter, so I wanted to reconnect with my roots in England. So I connected with my cousin, and I was going to go stay with him. And then if I got the guts, I was going to go just show up on my dad's doorstep. But I wasn't sure if I'd have the guts once I got over there. But the first night there, I met up with my whole family, like my uncle, my aunt, my cousins. And my aunt told me when my dad moved back to England, he stayed with her for a while. And she said he laid up on the couch for about a week, like just miserable, like crying. And that he would stare at our family photo that was on the wall. And when she told me that, I just got this like feeling of, oh, he did care. So that's like all I needed to hear. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go tomorrow. It was her telling me that gave me the reassurance that I needed, that he did love us and he was upset. And, this is probably just as hard on him as it was on us. So, and the next day my cousin took me and I just showed up on my dad's doorstep unannounced. We hadn't seen each other for 15 years. And then from there, I visited a few more times before he died.
Yeah, I that's tough. That's really tough. I think again, it doesn't matter which child it is, but I applaud you for having the courage to do that, because if there's one thing I can connect with your father is the shame. Once you really kind of sit, and I think one of the most difficult things for these wrestlers to ever do was to not work.
Yes.
Because then they had to sit in their emotions and their feelings and their mistakes and when they were just striving for that fame and for that audience. And I remember a time I asked my dad, I was like, what was the feeling like walking out into a stadium, of 70,000 people? And he looked at me, he's like, you'll never know.
Yeah.
Like he didn't mean it in a bad way. He's like, you just can't explain it.
Yeah.
Right. So I think the addiction is as much to the road as it is to the substances that got them through the road, and TE and I have talked about this a couple of times that, like, back in the day, you take these guys on the road, they didn't have cell phones. There was 3 channels.
Yeah. 3
channels. What are you doing? Are you going to stay in the hotel room from 5 p.m. till, 6 p.m. the next night or whatever? Like, no, you're going to go out. And so the demons followed them pretty easily. Now, I know that it had a huge impact on my brother. For some reason, it was a different impact on my brother than it ever was on me.
Yeah.
And so we had a totally different relationship and dynamic.
Are you older or younger?
And my brother's 10 years older.
Yeah.
So my dad would have been like 18 or 19 when my brother was born. He was 28 when I was born. So, obviously maturity is that was a big deal. But my dad at the end of the day wanted to be home. And I think that was, he dealt with the shame and all the mistakes and stuff. But, it for whatever reason, my mom put up with him and let him come home. And then we all had to put up with my mom because she was mad she put up with him. So that's a whole nother dynamic. But yeah. we were talking before. So what you've got a couple of social media pages, right? You've got yourself as well as and the official one for your father. Yeah. You manage. What are those handles again?
So my personal Instagram is Bronwyne Jewel, and then my dad's is official Dynamite Kid.
Are you enjoying interacting with people that obviously appreciate your father's legacy?
I am. It's for the most part, my dad has a lot of loyal fans who, a lot of them, send me a lot of unique, rare photos that I'll post. So I appreciate that. And, they're very loyal and, comment nicely. But of course you get those negative comments that sometimes hit you in the feels.
Yeah. I've been fortunate and we talked about this before. I've been fortunate. I've had maybe what I would say 2 interactions that were negative, but they were directed at me. And, so it wasn't, yeah. So it was, you're living off your dad's legacy or something like that. And I'm like, that's funny. I've never worn my robe to work. Yeah. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I go in and it says, hey, we're going to give you a promotion and a pay raise because you're Orndorff. So not happened one time, never once. Now, if anybody's listening and wants to do that, please feel free to give me a call. Official Mr. Anyway. So, with everything that you have seen, coming in from different things, like I've gotten emails and videos from Italy and the Netherlands and Australia. And what has been your favorite, I guess, moment that you were able to, maybe see a side of your dad that you didn't know existed?
I've had wrestlers basically come to me saying how they were backstage with my dad during Stampede Wrestling and how much, how respected he was and how he always looked out for the little guys. I think that's a big thing that I always hear about my dad is he'd stick up for the underdogs. And I really like that about my dad. And I think that I do that too. I try to do that always. I love a good underdog story. And so did he. He was just good to everyone, even in school. He would stick up for the ones that were being bullied. And I know people say that my dad, or people like to say my dad was a bully, and I don't really agree with that because of stories like this. It just shows that he was always sticking up for the underdog and in school known to tell the bullies off. No,
and it's funny. I think there's a theme there. Most of these wrestlers that I know of, there are exceptions. Most of them were not bullies. They kind of came into that persona more because they were being bullied, whether it be at home or at school. So, I've always said that Mr. Wonderful was my dad's, it was his shield to protect his inner child. Yeah. Because my dad didn't believe he was Mr. Wonderful deep down. Now he could turn it on and think it, but when he turned it off, he was back to the shame and regret and the childhood memories and all those other things. So, I've always believed, and I'm sure you'll probably agree that, wrestling was a way for them to get out of a bad situation. Right. So what was your father's, if you don't mind sharing, what was your father's home life like, with him growing up? What was his relationship with his mom and dad?
I think it was good. My grandpa was really strict and tough on him. My grandpa was a boxer. So he actually tried to get my dad to follow the family line of becoming a boxer. And my dad did do a little bit of training, and they had to work really hard. Northern England, there wasn't a lot of money. So they were, not well off, hard workers. And my dad was working with him, with my grandpa. And that's how he actually met Ted Bentley, who became my dad's trainer. He was a wrestling coach, and he was a hard worker, my dad, at a young age. And Ted just looked at him and was like, I think you should bring him to wrestling on whatever day of the week and give it a go. And so he did, and never looked back.
Yeah. And your dad, obviously, the British Bulldogs will go down arguably as one of the top 3 tag teams of all time. That's just my opinion. I don't get into the minutia of who's number 1, because I think there's number 1s for different generations and they have a different iteration of it. But I at least for anybody that was born from 1978 to 1987, the British Bulldogs are it, right? Yeah. And and from, in my opinion, it's the most famous one to come out of the WWF for the 80s, without question. So, yeah. How did you deal with, obviously your father was away, but how did you deal with the expectation put on you by other people based on your father? Like, was there, did you ever feel like you were disappointing him because you weren't doing, whatever, whatever the expectations put on you out from, externally? What was that like to have a certain expectation as being the child of a professional wrestler?
I never really felt any of those expectations. I don't know if it's because I was so young when he was in the height of his career, and Stampede Wrestling, I was just born. WWF, I was just little. So I don't think kids in school really knew wrestling at the time because we were so little. And then being involved in wrestling shows as I grew up, like I have gotten involved starting in my 20s, balleting, managing. And I think more than anything else, I put that expectation on myself. I don't think anyone else does, but I'm always really hard on myself after I do a wrestling show. I'm like, I could have done more. I should have said more. I should have done this. And that's what I really started doing more recently. And so I'm like, why am I doing this? It's just like making me feel like crap. Maybe I should just stop. And so I haven't really been doing anything since the pandemic because it's the pandemic, but I am really missing it and I do want to get involved. So I've been trying to find different ways to do that or just keep it alive. Like I started the official Instagram page and then, I've been doing lots of podcasts throughout the pandemic. Next week, I work at a bar once a week. So I'm actually hosting WrestleMania trivia nights. So I just think that'll be really fun. Just different ways to be involved. And, I'm doing all kinds of merchandise for my dad. So it doesn't really have to be being in the wrestling show itself, but just finding different ways to do that.
I've really enjoyed doing the Instagram page. And the number of responses I'm sure you get again, and the number that they just say, thank you for doing this.
Yes.
Thank you for reminding me of my childhood and how much fun it was. And it always trips me out because I'm reading, I'm like, at that point, my childhood wasn't good. So I'm glad it was good for you.
Yeah.
Because that was killing me, what you're watching right now.
Kidding.
So it's when people ask me, do you watch wrestling? I'm like, I lived it. I don't need to watch it, And I was fortunate in the sense that my dad did take me on the road a lot. So I spent them up with him in Australia and over in multiple states, California. I'd spend a few weeks with him at a time, when they did actually stay somewhere, which was much later in his career. So I did enjoy that for sure. Now, is your father, is there anything you're doing right now with your father? Like you talk about your merchandise. Is there anything particularly you're really proud of? There's something you want to share?
It's just all been great. I don't know. Junk Shop Dog's been really amazing to work with and actually building friendships with these people. I'm not sure if you've seen their figures that they have. They're out of Australia and I've made like really good friends with them. And I think that's who I am. That's part of it is like, I'm not just like, let's make a deal. Like I'm actually making connections with people and making friends around the world. And that's the most important part for me.
Yeah, I agree. The relationships are what make this worth it.
You can tell right away if it's just business, but some people you just really connect with, and that's nice too.
Yeah, there's actually somebody from your neck of the woods. He's a pastor named O'Neill Walker, and we talk pretty regularly. And we obviously met through Instagram. Well, T.E. and I met through Instagram. It was just one of those you go back and forth, and it's a respectful conversation. You're like, okay, this person isn't trying to take advantage or isn't expecting something from me that I can't deliver.
Yeah.
But some of them, I hate when people call people marks. They're human beings. But that being said, what's the craziest message you've gotten on Instagram? I have to. Okay, let me go another direction because that's too generic.
Yeah.
How many times have you been asked out on Instagram?
I mean, maybe months.
Okay, a lot.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever asked me out, so you should. Not a single time has anybody said, "Hey, Trav." So that's obviously a compliment to how what a beautiful lady you are. Are there any other relationships you're able to build with wrestlers or obviously wrestlers' kids outside of the Hart family and kind of that immediate group that you knew, or have you connected with people outside of that over the last few years?
Yeah, I think the biggest ones for me are Mick Foley has always been really wonderful to me, and we have a great relationship, and Chavo Guerrero, and then Chris Jericho. So those three, I think, are the ones. They're so kind. They get it. Chavo's like, we all need to stick together because he comes from a wrestling family. Chris Jericho is Canadian and he spent a lot of time in Calgary, so he gets it where I come from. He did the narrating on my dad's Dark Side of the Ring story, so that's how we first connected. And then we'll just shoot each other messages here and there, so that's been pretty cool. And Mick Foley, I don't know, I just love him. He's the best.
I'll tell you a quick story about Chris Jericho. I hope he doesn't. Nobody listens to this podcast. It's just us trying to figure out our little crazy childhood, right? So, so I had a couple of different situations. You know, at the time, my own personal life was not where it needed to be, but my dad needed assistance, and so we had the GoFundMe pages, and Chris Jericho was more than generous to my father. We never spoke directly or anything like that, but in fact, I don't know that he even, I don't even know how I found out it was him that donated, but both him and Diamond Dallas Page actually did that. And so part of my goal, obviously, after things have changed in my life and things have gotten better, and God has blessed me in different ways that I don't deserve. So I'm hoping to use this platform to assist other wrestlers, like my dad was helped over the past 20 years. And my dad did give a lot to a lot of other people. I do know that, but to say his fans and other wrestlers have been generous would be a complete understatement. So it's amazing the support you get from that community and how close their relationships were. You think about, the number of people your dad probably trained or went to lunch with, or just gave him advice on wrestling. Was there anybody that came back and outside of, obviously the fans, but was there any in particular wrestler that was like, your dad is the reason I'm doing this?
I feel like there's been so many, I can't even think of one.
That's probably the best answer you could give.
Yeah.
Just so you know that, and that doesn't surprise me at all. Yeah. Seeing your Nat's your cousin, right?
Natty, yes.
Yeah. So forgive me. I see her on social media, but I just don't watch today's wrestling. I watch the old stuff all day long. But it's just not. I don't have the time. I'm too old. Like, I'm just trying to catch up on some childhood memories, right? So, seeing her go through this, have you noticed, at least in my opinion, you have better line of sight, so correct me if I'm wrong. Have you noticed that the quality of life, it seems to be a million times better than it did when our parents wrestled?
Yes, for sure. I think, better doctors, they're not on the road as much. Yeah, probably everything is just better.
Now, Bronnie, one of the things that happened after my father passed, and I've been very vocal about this. Dr. Omalu from the movie Concussion, well, obviously he wasn't in the movie, Will Smith was, but he did the autopsy on my father. And so I get a phone call from the funeral home, and it was the guy that had arranged everything for me. And he called me and said, "Hey, I just want to tell you something." And I was like, "What?" I'm like, "Oh God, what happened now? I can't handle much more." Yeah. He's like, "I just want you to be aware that when they took your dad's brain out, that it was the size of a child's, and that the doctor actually said that he had never seen one swollen up like a raisin." So concussion syndrome has been, debated, questioned, what's the science behind it? But the short version is, it's a reduction of brain volume, which leads to obviously mental impairment in many ways. And so the doctor was very open and said, "Hey, Trav, like he hasn't remembered a lot for 20 years. Like, he was coming in and out for at least the last 20 years. I believe you spoke on Dark Side of the Ring about this, again, going back to some of the clips, but what has been your experience with, CTE and specifically concussion syndrome, and how do you think that affected your father as well?
Yeah, I just know that from my mom, especially because I was so young, but when the violence happened at the end there, that wasn't the man she knew. That wasn't the man she fell in love with or married. And I mean, that's why to this day, there's no hate. There's no holding grudges there. She knows that was not him. That is not who she married. And same with growing up with my dad. That's not the man I knew. He never was bad to me. He was never angry. But over the years of, head trauma, he began to be a different person. And that's what we talked about on Dark Side of the Ring.
My dad told me one time, I just said, "Dad, did you ever," I was after one of my concussions from playing football. Mm-hmm. But I remember asking Dad, I'm like, "If I got hit like this, how many concussions have you had?" He said, I blacked out so many times in the ring that I couldn't tell you. I don't even remember doing moves. In fact, there were times he would do like an arm drag or something, and he would do it so he could gain consciousness. So he needed to reset. So they'd slow down a move. And I think one of the times was specifically he got thrown into like the stairs. And Dad said he woke up the next night and was like he had been functioning. He walked out, went and got his clothes, everything. But he remembers becoming conscious like the next night, like at like 6 p.m. It was like all of a sudden the fog had faded and he realized where he was and what he was doing, and he didn't know how he got there. Which I've done that too, but it wasn't from a wrestling ring, so I can't blame him for that. So, well, yeah, I know that. Did you ever have? Did they have an autopsy done, or were you able to get his brain donated by chance?
Unfortunately, no. So I'm all the way in Canada. My dad's in England, of course. So I wasn't really handling any of that, and I don't really know. Like, we never got an autopsy even of how he died. Like, I can't give you a direct answer, but we don't really need that because we know.
Yeah, Yeah, there's no question. I think for me, it was about trying to help others and get people to understand this is no joke. This isn't something that is it's extremely relevant. And I'm so glad. I was talking to, I think it was Garrett Bischoff I was talking to, and he said, how much better the training and the treatment and the road and everything is than it was, way back when it was, 350 days a year.
Yeah. That's what my dad, he felt it himself. He knew something was off, and that's when he left Canada and didn't come back, because he knew, he was like, I'm not myself. This isn't me, and I need to get out of here, kind of.
Yeah.
Things get worse, and I admire him for doing that.
Yeah, it takes a lot of courage sometimes to leave what you love to protect those that you love.
Yeah.
If there's anything that you could share, if there was one thing you are passionate about, your father. For me, with my dad, I want people to remember him as somebody who fought for the little guy as well.
Yeah.
Like true story that the dad, I can remember going to, the Paralympics, when I was younger, Special Olympics. And if I had ever said anything derogatory about somebody that was disabled or, had a handicap or, whatever, specifically genetically, he would have ripped my head off and shoved it back down my throat. Like he would have, it was just one of those things. I heard somebody say something derogatory about somebody one time, and I thought my dad was going to kill him. I really did. But I guarantee you that guy never used that word again. Let's just say that. But, your dad fighting for the little guy, and obviously he probably had a fight as the little guy. So that's part of the motivation. The one thing for my dad's legacy I want people to remember is the human being he was and how big his heart was. For your father, I imagine it's very similar. But what do people not know about, the Dynamite Kid that you would want them to know, that kind of maybe, for lack of better words, gave you closure about everything in the relationship you have?
Yeah, I just think that even in the end, when my dad this is just an example of who he was as a person. He had very little, but he was always wanted to give to us kids. So I think it was probably the first time I reconnected with him in 2010. He's living in a 1-bedroom flat. He has nothing, but he opened up his wallet and gave me like all the money in his wallet. And I was like, no, Dad, like, I don't want to take your money. He was like, no, because I was talking about how much, because I was marking out for Union Jack stuff at the airport. Like, I wanted this and that. And my house is covered in Union Jacks, and I still have all this stuff. But he gave me the money, and he's like, no, take this and buy your brother and sister something. And I was like, no, like, I don't want to take it. He's like, no, take it. And like, he made me take it. I'm like, okay. And then he had a ring, a gold ring, and it said Tommy on it. And he gave it to me to give to my brother, which my brother still has to this day. And so it's
very, very, very cool.
Yeah. My brother being his only son, he wanted him to have that. And I guess for years after, his wife was very upset about that because that was his wedding ring.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But I'm like, he wanted his son to have it. So that's how much, his kids meant to him. And though he had very little, he was like, take whatever you want.
I'll say this to you, and I'm not a psychoanalyst, but I think that the shame and the road did things to those guys' minds that we'll never fully understand. Again, remembering this was the 80s and 90s and drugs and like, I'm not kidding when I say this. My brother, I think, had like 4 DUIs and still had a driver's license back in the 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we used to joke that he didn't get out of jail. He just got leave of absence, so, and how is your brother doing, by the way? Is he doing well?
We're all doing great. Like, he has a almost 3-year-old son as well. Our kids are actually born 6 hours apart, which was,
oh, wow.
So I was only 2 months pregnant when my dad died. And so my brother's wife was pregnant at the same time. And if it wasn't like, I couldn't fly over to England for the funeral or anything because I was pregnant and scared that the stress would make me lose my baby. So my cousin actually Zoomed me into the funeral, which was really nice of him to do. I'll never forget that he did that for me. But anyway, so my brother and I, our babies were 6 hours apart. We were in the same hospital. After we had the babies, we got to share a room together. It was just wild. So I felt like my dad was there for all of that. So my brother's doing great. He's married. He has a son. And then my sister also they both actually just bought their first homes. My sister has a daughter as well. So we're all doing really good. I think my dad would be really proud.
I have no doubt. That he, in his heart and in his mind, he was doing everything he was doing to take care of his family. But, again, things, we all have demons. I have my own, and I haven't exercised all of them, but I've gone toe to toe a few rounds with a couple of them. Yeah. But that's amazing to hear.
When my dad left, there was no more money left, really. They kind of blew it all after his surgeries and everything, but we had a large, beautiful home. So when my dad left back to England, he left that with us. Like, he didn't fight my mom for it. Like, sell that house and give me the money. Like, it wasn't like that. It was like, no, you and the kids keep this house. And that gave us the life that we have been able to live. So we actually sold the house because it was on a huge property. My mom bought a smaller property in the city, like not the acreage. So she had money in the bank. And the crazy thing is that home now is about to become my house. I'm taking over the house. So I feel like it was like given to me from my dad, because it was basically, we bought it on my dad's wrestling career. So
right. Absolutely.
I'm emotional that I'm going to be moving into that house.
I don't think people understand how broke the wrestlers were from the 80s. Like, and like, they'll assume that Vince McMahon gives us a personal cell phone call and is like, here's $100,000 to take care of your father. No, my dad was an employee of WWF. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to say WWE.
No, I always say WWF.
I always say WWF. I'm still mad at the World Wildlife Federation.
Me too.
I'm like, y'all like, it's like they took an axe to my childhood just a little bit and it scarred just a little bit more. So, no, I think it's amazing. And I do agree. Your father, that was, the legacy he left, besides his wrestling career, again, these men weren't perfect. And there was nobody on the road dealing with their mental health or, making sure they were taking care of themselves. And, when you see so many people with fame that really deal with severe depression after they can no longer walk down the aisle and get that admiration. And, they build their identity around it. So the fact that your father, when he left, I'm sure, again, I just have to believe that he regretted so many things in his mind and couldn't get over them, but didn't want that to impact you guys. In fact, he might've left in his own mind for your own safety.
Yeah, he did.
And that's an admirable thing, even if it's not the thing we wanted. But we always want what we want, and maybe not always know what we need. So, well, Bronnie, I want to kind of tie all this up. So, I know you've got we mentioned a couple of the Instagram pages, and where can they find your merchandise for your father?
Yeah, so Pro Wrestling Tees has T-shirts, and in the UK, we started up Wrestle Merch Central. They also have T-shirts. If you're in the UK, then shipping is cheaper. And then we're going to have a few figures coming out. So Junk Shop Dog is about to release theirs. They have their own Instagram, so you can go follow them. And then just follow me on my dad's official Dynamite Kid page, and I'll post anything new that's coming up for merchandise.
I will do that. In fact, I already do follow you. Did you happen to see that picture I posted of your dad and?
I don't think I did.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I'll make sure we send it to you after the podcast. So it's a picture of my dad and Dave Boy Smith, and they're holding my dad back left to right, like they're holding each arm, the two of them. And my dad, it's one of like 2 times in my entire life I ever saw my dad bleed in the ring, because he always said he was too pretty to do that. And that's true story. And but he had blood all over his face, and your dad and Davey were holding him back. But in fact, we posted a photo the other day where the first time my dad, and I don't think he wrestled many times, but he wrestled Bret Hart, and they spelled it Bret Brett.
Yes, he hates that.
Oh, yeah, but this was WWF did it.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
It was WWF spelled it wrong on the screen.
Yeah.
So it's a screenshot of them misspelling his first name. So, well, listen, thank you so much. This is, I always say we have the most messed up family on the face of the planet, but we have each other, and that's what makes it important. So, thank you for coming on. I know it's been, a little bit of a trial to get up here, but you have represented yourself well. You have represented your father's legacy well. You've been more than transparent on more than one occasion. Obviously, Dark Side of the Ring, comes to mind. And I saw the clips. I get a little sick to my stomach when I watch a whole episode.
That's
I knew many of these guys, and so it's like I was talking to Chris Benoit like a few days before everything happened with him. So that stuff just it's a little post traumatic stress for me. But you should be very proud of what you're doing with your father's legacy, and I don't think there's anybody better to do it than you. So thank you so much for coming on. And we wish you the best of luck. And hopefully we'll get an update, maybe bring you back some other time when we have something more to talk about.
Yes. Thank you so much. This was so fun. I really liked it.